Good evening, everyone. Welcome to SBCC Garvin Theater. Right? And I think importantly, I want to say that today, we have a presentation by Father Greg Boyle from Homeboy Industries, and I know a lot of you were waiting for this presentation back in December, and I just want to take a moment to think about everything that happened in December and then January with our community out here in Santa Barbara, and acknowledge that, and just think of all the folks that have been impacted by that, and take that moment for just to reflect on that, right, before we start this evening. A lot of the folks on our campus were directly impacted by not only the fires, but the mudslides and everything that took place because of those two natural disasters. And so, it took a lot of planning and opening up of schedules and so on, but we're fortunate and honored to have Father Boyle here today to present to us his new book and share some of the stories and ideas and the heartfelt community that comes out of Homeboy Industries and the work there. I personally want to say thank you to G for not only all the work that you've done for so long, but for impacting my life and helping me get to where I am. I will forever be grateful, and your work is, I share with a lot of the folks that I talk to, that is impacted so many different lives, not only in Los Angeles, but worldwide. And so without further ado, I want to ask Father Boyle to come up and present for us. Thank you.
Put it over on the area right there. Thank you, Luis. It's a privilege to be with all of you and to be with my old friend Luis and a lot of friends here. So I'm going to yak for a little bit, and then we'll just do a kind of one of these and yell it out, and then I can drive back to LA, which I'm really looking forward to. So it's a privilege of my life for 34 years to have worked with gang members and to have them shape my heart and align me to a new way of thinking. People like Luis Perez, who I was just thinking of the other day, who worked for us for like 10 years and was kind of a force of nature. And he was, running things at Homeboy. A homie, been to prison, tattooed, heroin addict. But he also was kind of a dynamic speaker, and so he would go to schools, and schools would ask for him by name, and he was enjoying inhabiting that role. And so he and we went out to dinner, and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly. And he said, you gotta pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. I said, yeah, no shit. So brace yourselves. So there's kind of a vision I kind of want to talk about a little bit, and it's a vision that brings you out here right in the middle of finals and to kind of reimagine something. All of us want the world to look differently than it currently looks. Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? And so we are called and invited to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. And so we imagine, and I would suggest we imagine it with God, a circle of compassion, and then we imagine nobody standing outside that circle. We together attempt to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And so we go out to the margins, because that's where the real change happens. If you stand at the margins, look under your feet, the margins are getting erased because you chose to stand there. And you stand with a real particularity with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. And you stand with those whose dignity has been denied. And you stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And every once in a while, you get this exquisite, amazing privilege to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. You get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. I suspect if kinship happened to be our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice, we'd be celebrating it. For no kinship, no peace, no kinship, no justice, no kinship, no equality. No matter how singularly focused we may well be on those worthy goals, they actually can't happen unless there's some undergirding sense that we belong to each other. And so you go to the margins and you brace yourselves because people will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. You don't go to the margins to make a difference because then it's about you. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make us different. There are a lot of folks who are kind of trying to walk the walk and instead of just talk the talk in this crowd here. So I kind of want to, I don't think any of that makes any sense unless there's a kind of a sense of who God is for you. I wouldn't normally kind of address that here, but I feel like I can, that I had a spiritual director years ago who used to say, we need a better God than the one we have. He was a Jesuit. But of course he's right, because we've settled for a partial, puny God, a more realistic God. But there are two kinds of gods. There's the God we actually have, and then there's God we've settled for. I remember a long time ago when Dylan Roof killed all those people in Mother Emanuel Church, and then a week later, family members of the victims stood in front of him and said, we forgive you. And you knew you were in the presence of the God we actually have. And then 9 months later, when they sentenced him to be executed, you knew we had wandered back to the God we've settled for, the puny one, the partial one, the more realistic one. I think it's kind of important sometimes to kind of, because we're always going to imitate the kind of God we believe in. The homies have sort of helped me in this by mangling the English language in a charming, beautiful way. You kind of arrive at it, like for example, a homegirl named Lisa came into my office. She wanted to introduce her man to me at the end of the day. He came to pick her up, and she was a gag member in our 18-month program, and she introduces him and says, this is my sufficient other. And I said, no doubt. Homeboy, we're in our 30th year, and it's we're a $19 million annual operation, which is a far cry from how we were in our storefront days. But I have a CEO named Tom Vosa who kind of runs the place, so I don't have to worry about budgets and cash flow. He does, and so it was nice to hand over the reins. So I had a homie come into my office one morning, and he said, damn, Gene, my lady, she is in a bad mood today. I said, why? He said, well, she's beginning her administration period. And I said, well, I've just finished mine, so I kind of know what she's going through. But more to the point of our little detour here about God, I was saying Mass as a priest at San Fernando Juvenile Hall, and in those days we were in the gym, and there were like 500 gang members in there, all male. I think there have been 2 rows of females. And I'm listening to the word being proclaimed. So I had these little hojas, these little sheets that had the readings in English and Spanish, and I'm vested. I have my alba and my stole. I'm sitting in a little aluminum chair, and And the homies are getting up and reading. So I'm closing my eyes. I'm listening. I'm not going to read along. I'm just going to listen. So first guy got up and did the first reading. And then the second guy got up to do the responsorial psalm. And there was kind of an overabundance of confidence in him. And he gets up and he says, "The Lord is exhausted." And I said, "What the hell?" And it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's way better. Because, if you think about it, the exalted God is sort of created in our own image. Anybody in this room or outside of it, if we were God, we would want to be exalted. But the God who's always greater, as St. Ignatius of Loyola always talks about, is this God who's more tender than tender, this God who's about the other, generous, humble, exhausted. Yeah, that's more like it. That is a better God than the one we have. I just buried my 92-year-old mama, and she had 8 kids, and she was not one bit afraid of dying. Every once in a while she'd say, "I'm so happy to be going home," and part of it was my dad died 22 years ago, and so she wanted to be joined with him. But she was kind of oddly exhilarated by the whole notion of dying. At one point she said, "I've never done this before," which is something you might say just before skydiving. And it was, I have all these sibs, and I said, well, there are 8 of us. I remember at one point I was testing her mental agility. I don't know why I was. I mean, she was very sharp. In fact, for the last year, she was watching so much MSNBC. She was becoming Rachel Maddow, and so she was like this. But at the end of the last 2 weeks, I was kind of saying, "How many kids do you have?" "Oh, 2. I have 2 kids. I said, "Really? What are their names?" "Eileen and Maureen," which is the names of my 2 oldest sisters. "Oh, I love them so much," she says. "I'm so happy with them." I said, "No other kids?" And she goes, "Oh, no. 2's plenty." She said. So I had to break that news to my other 5 sibs, But I mentioned this because in the last 2 weeks, she'd be in and out of consciousness, and 1 or 2 or 8 of us would be around her bed at any given time. And actually, I was there when she died. Her last words to me, she opened her eyes and she looked at me and she said, "Oh, for crying out loud," and she went back to sleep because she was pissed that she wasn't dead. But when she finally died and I was there, just the 2 of us, and some of my sisters said, "We're going to bring back lunch," and she just let out this tiny, wondrous, glorious gasp, and then she died. Skydiving. So in the last 2 weeks, the thing she did was she'd be in and out of consciousness, and we'd be standing around her bed, and she'd wake up and she'd focus on one of us. And she'd lock her eyes onto yours and she'd go, with breathless delight, "You're here. You're here." And after she died, I kept thinking that's the only agenda item, I think, on our God's list. Our exhausted God just wants to look at us with breathless delight and say, "You're here. You're here." That's it. Nobody believes that, but I think that's the whole thing. And I mention that because it won't make any damn sense at all to go to the margins unless you know that that's kind of what undergirds your standing there, is the God who says, "You're here." You know, at Homeboy Industries, I'm not the great healer, and that gang member over there is in need of my exquisite healing. The truth is, we're all a cry for help. We're all in need of healing. It's one of the things that joins us together as members of the human family. But even in service, for as good as it is, it's where you start, it's not where you end. Service is the hallway that gets you to the ballroom. You want to get to the ballroom, which is the place of exquisite mutuality, where there is no us and them, there's just us, where there is no daylight that separates us. Because sometimes in service it happens, you know, service provider, service recipient. No, you don't want that. You want to bridge that as best you can. And because then it's about you if you're kind of depleted in the service of the other. A hardcore gang intervention worker, former gang member himself in Houston, after a talk I gave, he was working in the streets with gang members, and he kind of pleaded with me. He says, how do you reach them? And I said, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? Because I think that's the only thing there is. Can you allow yourself to be touched and your heart realigned because you received who they are? And then in exquisite mutuality, everybody inhabits their own dignity. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend, and he was absolutely the best listener I've ever been in the presence of. If you were talking to Cesar, nobody else existed except him and you, and he was laser beam focused on you. He was never looking over your shoulder to see if someone more important was on the approach. But once famously, a reporter had commented to him and said, wow, these farm workers, they sure love you. And Cesar just shrugged and smiled and said, the feeling's mutual, which of course is the goal. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? We don't even want the distance of service provider, service recipient. There was a homie, nobody found more job opportunities in our 30-year history than this kid I knew in the projects. We all called him Dreamer. He got into a gang. One of the smartest homies I think I've ever known, though I can't recall he ever actually went to school, but had a dangerous sense of humor, very funny. He's in his 40s now, has a house, married, kids, in a good construction job. But in his early 20s, he was like a yo-yo, in and out of being locked up. I'd find him a job in the private sector or in one of our social enterprises, and then he would, wander back to vague criminality, usually something involving drugs, the use of or the sale of. And then he'd wander back to me. So this was quite a frustrating pattern that kept repeating itself. And so this one time he was released after a 4-month probation violation stretch in county jail, and there he is sitting in front of my desk. And he says what gang members often say, this time it'll be different. And I go, all right. So with him sitting there, I pick up the phone, I call a friend of mine who runs a vending machine company in Alhambra, and he had hired homies in the past, a guy named Gary. And sure enough, the guy says, you tell that guy he can start tomorrow. That's a holy man right there. So Dreamer began work the next day at the vending machine company. Well, 2 weeks later, there he is again in front of my desk, and I couldn't believe my eyeballs. I said, Híjole, Madre Santa, here we go all over again. But this time he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out his very first paycheck, and he says, damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job. And I said, well, gosh, who? And he looked at me crazy and he said, well, God, of course. And I said, well, sure, no, that's right. that would be God. You thought I was going to say you. I said, no, gosh, God's number one. He said, you are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days. I'm sorry, them Genesis days? He goes, yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now. Well, we just fell out of our chairs howling with laughter, and I defy you to identify exactly who's the service provider and who's the service recipient. It's mutual. So we're invited to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. And that has a lot of implications for how our world might, in fact, look if we dedicated ourselves to it. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. So the homies have taught me so much of value in the last 30 years, but in the last, 10 years, they've taught me how to text, and I'm so grateful for them. Because I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I'm pretty good at it, LOL and OMG and BTW. And the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. I know I can't be alone in being vexed by this autocorrect thing, with, like I had a homegirl named Bertha, kind of a tough cookie on a Sunday. She texts me, where you at? I said, I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas. Monjas is Spanish for nun, sister, religious women. About to speak to a room full of monjas. I pushed send and autocorrect told her I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas. Which she thought was pretty darn interesting. Even now, as I, homies, their hair is on fire, and it's like they're going to cut off my lights and my car bill and my this and that. I just got a ticket, I had an account, I got to pay it. One guy needed $100 to finish off his rent. I didn't have it, so I simply wrote, things are tight. I pushed send. Autocorrect told him, thongs are tight. He wrote back, sorry to hear that. What about my rent? So there I am with two older homies, Manuel and Poncho, and older vatos who work at Homeboy, and they're about to help me give a talk at a high school. We just had morning meeting, and so they were at morning meeting, and after we finished, morning meeting is 10 minutes every morning. And then they get in the car. Manuel's in the front seat, Poncho's in the back, and we drive to Palm Desert to this high school. Well, we're 15 minutes on the road, and Manuel gets an incoming text. He reads it to himself, and he chuckles. And I said, what is it? Oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. And, well, Snoopy and Manuel, I just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazo as the day was beginning. And Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds of our workers, all gang members, and it's a tough job. I wouldn't want it because, well, this may come as a surprise. Gang members can occasionally be attitudinal. And so I said, well, what's he say? And he goes, oh, it's dumb. Hang on, let me find it here. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now. Show them they got the wrong guy. Well, I nearly drove into oncoming traffic. We laughed so damn hard. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other. And now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. That's what it looks like when you obliterate the illusion that we're separate, that there is an us and a them. And that is our exhausted God's dream come true. So Homeboy was born a long time ago, 1988, when I was the youngest pastor in the history of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles and the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles. Dolores Mission, and it was nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village, largest grouping of public housing west of Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other, which was unheard of in public housing, even in LA. So I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and I buried my 250th about 4 months ago. Not all from that community, but I get asked to do this. I know a lot of gang members. My parish was considered by the LAPD the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in the whole city was my parish. So the first thing we did was we started a school because there were so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them, so they were kind of wreaking havoc in the middle of the day, writing on walls, violent, selling drugs. And so I walked out to them and I would kind of isolate them from the crowd, and I'd ask each one, hey, you know, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said, yeah. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, you know, so that kind of forced my hand. So right across the street from the church is our parochial school, grades K to 8, occupying the whole first and second floor. But the entire third floor was the convent where the ninjas lived. And so I gathered all the nuns together in the living room. There were about 8 of them, and I sat them down and I said, hey, would you guys mind, you know, moving out? And we could turn the convent into a school for gang members. And they looked at each other and they said, sure. And that was the extent of their entire discernment process. And so that brought gang members in large numbers to the church property, which kind of created something of a disconnect. You know, people in the parish were saying, wait a minute. Aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and bad people out. So that was a good gospel challenge. And so, and then gang members in short order said, you know, if only we had jobs. So myself and the women, we marched around the factories that surrounded the housing projects trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. So we had to invent stuff, like we had a maintenance crew and a landscaping crew and a graffiti removal crew and a crew to build our child care center, all made up of rival enemy gang members of the 8 gangs in my parish. And then 92 came, April 30th of 1992, right after the verdict handed down on the Rodney King case. And all of Los Angeles exploded. Well, every pocket of poverty, except the poorest parish in the city didn't. Dolores Mission and the projects did not. So the LA Times wanted to know why that was, so they came and asked me, and I said, well, maybe it's because we had 60 strategically hired rival enemy gang members working side by side together. And, you know, they had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang the night before, and more to the point of your question, a reason not to torch and ignite their own community. So the article appeared, and a movie producer read it, a guy named Ray Stark, who I found out later happened to have $500 million. So he summoned me. He said, how do you think I should use my money? I look back now and I can see that I woefully undershot my request. I was young. I said, well, why don't you buy this abandoned bakery right across the street from the school? It's got ovens. We could put hairnets on enemy rival gang members. They could bake bread. I don't know, we could call the place Homeboy Bakery. And he said, sure. And that was the extent of my business plan. And then we were off and running. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name. Previously, we had called ourselves Jobs for a Future. Nothing stops a bullet like a job. It was kind of creating jobs and then dispatching homies to employers who were willing to give them a chance. So we changed our name to Homeboy Industries. Not every business venture worked. I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And nobody ever intends to do such a thing. We kind of backed our way. You evolve, into becoming something. And so now we've backed our way into becoming the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry program on the planet. 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors trying to reimagine their lives. The centerpiece is our 18-month training program, so homies want a piece of that because it's a paid gig, so they all come in and drug test and orientation and selection committee interviews. And once they get in, we have classes for them and for community folks, anger management, parenting, 40 different kind of classes. We still have a school. Free tattoo removal. No place on the planet Earth removes more tattoos than we do. We have a designated clinic in our headquarters. 3 laser machines, 1 paid physician assistant, but 47 volunteer doctors. So if anybody here is starting to regret their SBCC tattoo, see me afterwards. Part of the stance always it needs to be, if you go to the margins, is you listen. If it's humble, you'll never stumble, as the homies, as Robert Amado always tells me. And the opposite of that, of course, is hubris. So humility asks folks at the margins, hey, what would help? But hubris says, here's what your problem is. And you want to stay anchored in humility because that's the strategy of Jesus. And so tattoo removal was born just because I think, we were listening. The homie came into my office. I never met him before. His name was Frank, 2 days out of Corcoran State Prison, sitting in front of my desk. Tattooed on his forehead, filling the whole space like a damn billboard. And pardon my French, it said, fuck the world, filling the whole forehead. And he says, I am having a hard time finding a job. And I said, well, Frank, maybe we could put our heads together on this one, And I'm thinking, where do I send this guy, to McDonald's? Do you want fries with that? No, I don't want fries. Mothers clutching their kids and running out of the store. So I hired him, and he bagged bread for a while. And I went looking for a doctor, and I found Dr. Vanor at White Memorial Hospital. He had a laser machine. He was a dermatologist. He donated 1 hour a month to chip away on Frank's forehead and a handful of others. Well, before too long at all, we had a waiting list of 3,000 gang members who wanted this service, so we couldn't really stay with that arrangement. Parentheses, Frank is currently a security guard at a movie studio in Hollywood, and there is no trace left of the angriest, dumbest thing Frank's had ever done, proving once and for all that everyone in this room and outside of it is a whole lot more than the worst things you ever did. The business of second chances is everybody's business. So we have therapy. Everybody's in therapy. We have case management. We have navigators. We have in all our training programs in businesses, social enterprises. We have solar panel installation training program, a lot of apprentice electrician and welding. Homeboy Bakery is thriving. Homeboy Silkscreen. Homeboy Homegirl Merchandise, where we sell our logo stuff. Homeboy Diner, the only place you can get food at City Hall in downtown LA. I just flew in from Miami, and there's our restaurant at Terminal 4, LAX. Homeboy Recycling, which is e-waste, electronic waste. We have farmers markets, a thing called Homeboy Grocery, where we sell chips, salsas, and guacamole in a variety of, from Gelson's to Ralph's, from San Luis Obispo to San Diego. And Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. And they cater. It's kind of a who's who if you go there. You know, you're going to run into elected officials, movie stars. Jim Carrey has been there many times, and Jack Black and Forrest Whitaker. And once, with 2 hours' notice, we got a phone call from the Secret Service that Vice President Joe Biden, when he was vice president, wanted to have lunch at the famous Homegirl Cafe. So motorcade and entourage and selfies with Uncle Joe. And I wasn't there. I was in making my annual silent 8-day retreat. So when I came home, I saw Louis Mora, and Louis Mora said, "Well, while you were gone, we were visited by an MVP." Do you mean a VIP? Yeah, that one, VIP. Damn, do you imagine, here at Homeboy Industries, we were visited by the Vice President of the United States, Mick Romney. I think you can file that one under all white guys look alike. And I think we may have added a current affairs course shortly thereafter. But most famously of all, Diane Keaton showed up, Oscar winner, movie star, Godfather movies, Annie Hall. And her waitress is Glinda. And Glinda's a big girl, been there, done that, tattooed, felon, parolee, gang member. She has no idea who Diane Keaton is, and so she's taken her order. And Diane Keaton says, what do you recommend? And Glinda rattled off her 3 dishes that she particularly liked. And Diane Keaton says, well, I'll have that second one. That one sounds really good. And it's at that moment, for some reason, something dawns on Glinda. And she looks at Diane Keaton. She says, wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere. You know, like maybe we've met. And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it humbly. Oh, gosh, I don't know. I suppose I have one of those faces, you know, that people think they've seen before. And then Glinda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. Yeah, that just took my breath away. And I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings now that I think of it. But suddenly, kinship so quickly, Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress, exactly what God had in mind, and here you go again. God's dream come true, as Jesus explains it, that you may be one. I suppose he could have been more self-referential, but it's really about us. Everybody is invited to be enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love return people to themselves. At Homeboy, we're kind of allergic to this notion of holding the bar up and asking people to measure up. Instead, we just hold the mirror up and tell people the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth, and my truth is a gang member's truth. It's all the same truth. Here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch folks on the margins as they inhabit that truth, as they become that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. But at Homeboy, we know that you have to reach in and you have to dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. The scripture scholar Marcus Borg used to say that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history is shame and disgrace, and I think that's quite right. There's a line in the Acts of the Apostles, kind of odd. It leaps out at you, and it says only this: and awe came upon everyone. And it suggests that the measure of health in any community, including this one, may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So I get invited to give talks, and some years ago I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. And it was one of those all-day gang-in services for social workers from 9 to 5. So I figured, maybe I could do the keynote, open it, or speak at lunch, or close the day. So I said yes, and I bought a ticket. Well, a week before I was to fly to Richmond, Virginia, I pulled the letter out, and to my horror, I discover that I am to be the only speaker from 9 to 5 all damn day in Richmond, Virginia. And I remember saying to myself, oh, hell no. So I invited 2 homies in, Andre and Jose, and both of them are in our 18-month training program, gang members. And I sit them down. They're in their 16th month or something. And I sit them down. I said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia to speak to 600 social workers. I'd like you to get up and I'd like you to tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I'd never heard their stories, and Jose gets up first, and he's like 25 years old, and gang member into prison, tattooed. But he, at that point in his 18 months, he had sort of landed as a very valuable member of our substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery, and now he was helping younger homies with their addiction issues. He's in prison a long stretch, but he even had a longer stretch as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp. And he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish, he said to him, And we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. And then he continued. I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California. And she walks me up to an orphanage. And she knocks on the door, and the guy comes to the door, and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine, and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through. Second t-shirt, you could still see the blood. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is, if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded, which may well explain a lot of what we suffer this moment in our country in terms of division, despising the wounded. Whatever you do in a community to solve stuff, nobody has ever met a healthy treatment plan that was born of a bad diagnosis. I don't believe that's ever happened. So getting the diagnosis right is pretty key. 14 years ago, I was finally diagnosed with leukemia, and I still battle with it every once in a while. They'll check under the hood, and I need to go back into some different kind of treatment. But I'm doing okay at the moment, or as the homies still say, I hear your cancer's in intermission. I said, yes, apparently it's stepped out to the lobby to buy popcorn. May the line be long. But I went to give blood. I always gave blood once a year because I used to do it with my dad when he was alive, because we have the blood that is a universal whatever and anybody could use it or something. So I went there and the guy said, yikes, go to your doctor. So I went to my doctor and he said, oh, you have mono. So you don't really treat mono, you just stare at it, I guess, for a year. And I think we can agree that there's probably a difference between mono and leukemia, but because they just stared at me for a year, it got worse. You know, in leukemias, a bad diagnosis is not neutral. It puts you behind the 8 ball. You have to play catch up. I had to be raced into chemotherapy. So you want to get the diagnosis right, and there's so many bad diagnoses out there. So there I am on the Dr. Phil show. I know, what was I thinking? But but he was going to dedicate the whole hour to Homeboy, so how bad can this be? And so I walk out there, and Phil is sitting in his stool in the middle of the stage, and my empty stool awaits me. Well, to my horror, on his side of the stage is a gorgeous, beautiful mahogany coffin on a 4-wheel dolly deal. On my side of the stage is a perfectly reconstructed jail cell with toilet, bed, sink, bars. They went to great expense for these 2 set pieces. And so they fly from all different parts of the country, 3 young males, teenagers, African-American, Latino, and a Caucasian, all teenage boys who were gravitating perilously close to some kind of gang involvement. So one by one, they walk them out on the stage together with their very distraught single mothers. Each one who comes out, Phil sort of grabs the kid figuratively by the lapel and, don't you see where this choice is leading you? Finally, by the 3rd kid, I had to kind of intervene. I said, Phil, how do I break this to you? These kids don't need more data. They're not lacking information. They know better than you and I that this will lead to death or to prison. They don't care that it will. And that's the key diagnostic moment. Gangs are the places kids go when they've encountered their life as a misery, and who doesn't know that misery loves company? Address the misery, and you've done something. No kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. He's always fleeing something. There are no exceptions to that. Once I was at an anger management conference or something, and during the Q&A, some gang member, huge guy in the back of the room, says, "Hey, did I hear you right earlier? You said no kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. He's always fleeing something. No exceptions." I said, "Yeah." He comes from the back of the room, and he shakes my hand. "Well, you've just met an exception." And people clapped. And in my head, I thought, no, of course I didn't. Because I work with gang members every day. I know what it looks like when you're a stranger to yourself, when you haven't yet come to terms, when you don't know that you were fleeing something. So when Oprah asks you on her show, "Why'd you join a gang?" "Wine, women, and song. Join a gang and see the world." Well, that's just because it's too hard to say, "My mom used to put cigarettes out on me and hold my head in the toilet and flush till I nearly drowned." That's why you joined a gang. A reporter asked me one day, well, of course, we all know that kids join gangs because they want to belong. I said, "No, actually, no." And she kind of laughed. She said, "Everybody knows that." Like we were in a Geico commercial, you know, and I said, "Well, no, everybody says that. It doesn't mean it's true. There is no pull factor. There's no attraction. There is no lure. It's all push. There are only 3 profiles of kids who join gangs. There aren't 8. There aren't 5. There are only 3. The despondent kid, because this is about a lethal absence of hope. The kid who can't imagine tomorrow, and if you can't imagine and conjure up an image of your future, then your present isn't compelling. And if your present doesn't compel you, you won't care whether you inflict harm or duck to get out of harm's way, the despondent kid. The second profile is the traumatized, damaged kid, a kid who cannot see his way clear to transform his pain. So he keeps transmitting it, inflicting it. And the third profile of the kid who joins the gang is a mentally ill kid. Well, it's all on a continuum of severity. Some kids are more despondent than mentally ill. Some more kids are more traumatized than despondent. But that's it. I was in a city somewhere in this country, and the chief of police handed me a brochure. And it's one of those brochures you hand parents, telltale signs that your kid may be gravitating perilously close to gang involvement. And I opened it, it said, the number one reason why kids join gangs? Excitement. Well, if I were to compile a list of 100 reasons why a kid joined a gang, excitement wouldn't appear on that list. But that's the classic outsider view driving the inside of our policy. They're sitting in a room somewhere. Why would a kid join a gang? He's got to be drawn. He's got to be attracted. Hey, excitement, put that down. But if we got the diagnosis correct, what would we do in a city like Santa Barbara? We would infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign. We would help heal the traumatized. And we'd deliver mental health services in a timely and culturally appropriate way. So I'm going to tell one last story and get questions together. And we'll just go like this and I'll go like that. No microphones. We won't rush up to you. You don't have to come up here, yell it out. If you're meek and mild, I'll repeat the question. But before I tell this last story, I remember I was interviewed by a woman on the Christian Broadcasting Network, and she was saying, well, what do you do at Homeboy? What happens there? And so I said, well, we're the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet, and 15,000 people a year walk through, tattoo removal, job training, anger management, classes, therapy, case management, 9 enterprises, social enterprises where enemies work side by side with each other. It's a community of tenderness where gang members can re-identify who they are in the world, and they can gain this essential foundational healing and resilience, and then they leave us after 18 months, and now the world will throw at them what it will, but this time they won't be toppled. So I went on and on like that. And then she kind of made a face and she said, yeah, but you know, how much time do you spend each day at Homeboy Industries, you know, praising God? And I didn't know what to say. So I said, all damn day. I don't think she liked that answer very much. But it begs this question, and I'll lead into a story, which is, what kind of praise does our exhausted God have any interest in? So it occurs to universities sometimes to force their students against their will to read my book. Now I have 2 of them, but I'm not complaining. And so Gonzaga University, my alma mater in Spokane, forced their incoming freshmen to read my book. And I said, please come up here and speak, and we'll have a big venue, invite the community, we'll have 1,000 people there. I said, sure, and they said, can you bring 2 homies with you? Actually, I was going to bring 2 homies with me tonight, but it unraveled just as I was leaving. One guy was on a train, and he lives in, anyways, I went, okay, I got to go. So then bring 2 homies with you, and I do if people are going to pay for their plane trips, you know. And so I always pick homies to travel with me on a plane. I just did multiple trips recently. Always in the same way. I always pick enemy rivals who are among our trainees, just to force them to share a hotel room, you know, just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. I remember some time ago, I had 2 older vatos. We were at LAX and waiting for a flight, and homie, dead serious. I have to tell you, he was dead serious. He said, hey, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? I said, well, yes, you know, it's a requirement, and we'll be coming back on American. So I picked 2 homies, Bobby, an African-American gang member who at the time worked in our bakery, and Mario, who at the time worked in our merchandise store in our headquarters. And I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times with men and women. And I've never picked anybody more who turned out to be the most terrified, petrified of flying. It was actually starting to kind of freak me out. You know, he was Mario. He was unbelievable. He was hyperventilating, you know, and we hadn't even boarded the plane yet, you know. And so we're at Burbank Airport, at kind of a tiny airport, Southwest Airlines mainly. Big planes, big bay windows, but they don't have the hermetically sealed chute, you know, to enter, board the plane. You walk out onto the tarmac like you're the president, and you climb up the stairs to get to the front of the plane. And the big feature at Burbank is you climb up the stairs to get it to the back of the plane. And so I'm sitting there with Mario. Bobby's off somewhere. Our plane arrives. It's early morning. That's our plane. And I think, wow, he may die, you know, before we actually climb those stairs. And so I see our flight crew arrives, and they're all schlepping up the front steps. And there are 2 female flight attendants, both with very large cups of Starbucks coffee. And they're schlepping up the front steps. And Mario goes, when are we going to board the plane? I said, well, as soon as they sober up the pilots. There they go now, you know. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that. So I should tell you that in our 30-year history, nobody is more tattooed or has ever been more tattooed who's worked there than Mario. I mean, he's all sleeved out. Neck blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say the end, so that when he's lying in his coffin, there will be no doubt to anybody, the end. So I'd never been in public, and so as we're walking through Burbank Airport, people are like this, you know, and literally mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely, and I'm thinking, wow. That's amazing, because if you were to go to Homeboy tomorrow and ask anybody there, who's the kindest, most gentle, tender soul who works here? They wouldn't say me. They'd say Mario. He sells baked goods over the counter. He's proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance at changing the world. So we get to Gonzaga, and this always happens. They have the big talk Tuesday night, 1,000 people. What they don't tell you is all day Tuesday, they have 93 other talks. You know, this meeting, this class, this lunch, this class, on and on, all day long. So I tell these two guys, look, I'm not going to speak at these. You guys get up, and I'll be at the back of the classroom. And they were nervous and terrified, really, especially Mario, but they did a good job. Stories of terror and torture and violence and abuse of every imaginable kind. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance, otherwise you'd get scorched. I would not have survived a single day of their childhoods. So we get up in front of 1,000 people, and I'm not sure, I can't remember if I had planned them to do this, but I said, hey, you get up and speak before me, do 7 minutes each, and tell your stories like you did earlier. And then I got up and did my thing, and then I invite them and stand on either side of me and take questions like I'm about to do with you. And I said, yes, ma'am. And a woman stands, and she goes, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gate. And Mario is this tall, skinny drink of water, and he steps up and he clutches the microphone, and he's just terrified. Yes. And she goes, well, you say you're a father and you have a son and a daughter who are about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them? And Mario closes his eyes, and he clutches the microphone even more intently, and I can feel like he's just trembling, and he's getting a damn hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's going to say. And then when suddenly he blurts out, and as soon as he says those two words, he rushes back to his microphone clutching, closed-eyed retreat. And now I know he's losing the battle with his tears, but he wants to get this whole sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry, and she looks at Mario and she says, why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hand, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. But they, in turn, let there be no doubt, had been returned to themselves, which shouldn't surprise us because it's mutual. And I think that's the only praise our exhausted God has any interest in. And so you go out to the margins and you create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. And you brace yourselves. And then you cease to care whether anyone accuses you of wasting your time. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. We don't go to the margins to rescue anybody, but go figure. We all go to the margins. We all find rescue. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm sorry. That applause just woke your asses up, the three of you, didn't it? I don't even know what I'm talking about. All right, I yield the balance of my time, and I will never go over. It's against my religion, so go like this, go like that. One question will lead to a long-ass answer, so, brave soul, ask anything. Yes? How can you get involved in tattoo removal? As a doctor donating his time, or as somebody wanting their DACAs removed? I'll give you my card. Did you take my card earlier? I'll give you one. And then you just call, and it's still quite a waiting list, even though we're Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. We have these rituals. So we go through the thing and sing happy birthday every morning because there's always birthdays, and somebody reads the mission statement, somebody reads what the classes are for the day, and who's the case manager of the day, who's the navigator of the day, who's the workforce development person of the day. And then we do these things, and we'll say tattoo removal. And somebody from the clinic will say, all day. And whenever they say all day, the whole group, 400 people, go, all damn day. It's just a ritual. And if you say 9 to 5, we don't know what to do. We go, 9 to 5, or 9 to noon or something. But all damn day, it becomes this thing. And then you say to the cafe, soup, good morning, everybody. The soup for the day is, Consuelo's fish soup or something. It's always has a name, and everybody claps. And then it's bakery. Cinnamon rolls are being featured today in the bakery, and it's like that, It's a very important thing, because like when you have services and ritual, it's so key. And all these little rituals, And we always have tours, mini tours every day. So when I'm running the meeting, I'll say, visitors, tours. I don't even open my mouth. And everybody in unison says, and such, like that. It's it's a weird thing. I don't know what it is. But it's so joyous, people will, and announcements, I always say, any announcements from the floor? I do that every day. And so they'll say, I just passed my, GED. Oh my God, people go nuts. I got my kids back. People are sobbing. I'm 1 year sober today. Yay. It's just beautiful. Heaven won't be different from our morning meeting. See what I mean? He asked about tattoos, and I go off on a thing. But yeah, you call me and I'll get you in. Next question. Come on now. Yes. Decrease. So is a gang involvement sort of on the rise, or? So, keep in mind 1988 to 98 was the decade of death, I suspect, not just in LA, but probably here in Santa Barbara as well. 92 was the highest moment in LA, so I'm going to kind of guess it probably was a lot of other places. So we had 1,000 gang-related homicides in LA. Now that's been cut in half, and then cut in half again. But it's kind of an interesting thing. There was a generation in there that was too young to get into gangs, but they saw it all. They had to hunker down behind cars in the projects, shootings in the middle of the day. So they saw it all. And they had fatigue about it. This is my theory. And they didn't get into gangs. So you had a moment there where they said, count me out, I don't want any part of that. And now there is no collective memory. It's kind of interesting. Nobody has any collective memory of any kid who's 14 now doesn't remember the decade of death. He wasn't alive. So, and again, as long as you're addressing the despair, the trauma, and the mental health issues, you're going to be okay. It's interesting, this is why it's so essential what kind of God we have. I mean, not just because if you're a person of faith, but it really, your image of God will control what happens. It just does. So I was in Omaha, and I met this guy who was a social worker, went into prison every day. He came home to his 8-year-old boy, and his kid says, "Is everybody mean in there?" Well, that's an 8-year-old's notion. Who's in prison? The bad guy? That's an 8-year-old. But sometimes our sense of who God is a third grader. And then you're stuck there. Bad people go to prison because they don't know the difference between good and right and wrong. 8-year-old kid. Who's in prison in the United States of America? Poor people of color. Oh, then apparently they have their moral sense is out of whack. No. Why are poor people in prison? You can say the dirty, filthy, rotten system, like Dorothy Day used to always call it, because the poor have to carry more than everybody else. They simply do. And because they do, it exacerbates absolutely everything. They don't have the Betty Ford Clinic or the psychiatrist or the private school. It exacerbates absolutely everything. So if you start to think in terms of chronic toxic stress, everyone who comes into Homeboy is wearing this huge backpack filled with chronic toxic stress. And the first task at Homeboy is to, hey, go ahead, you can take that off. And then they find relief. And then they find a safe place. And then they find the sanctuary at Homeboy. Then they become the sanctuary they sought. Then they go home and provide that sanctuary to their kid, and you've broken a cycle. But morality has exactly nothing to do with this. This is not about right and wrong and good or evil. Exactly nothing. That's why the notion you have, is really important. St. Gregory the Great says that we are saved by the people we despise. And there's this sense of, if you can understand what that's about, and you know that God gets underneath stuff, God understands stuff. This is why God doesn't judge. We judge. We are judgmental. So when the 19-year-old Pobrecito killed the 17 in Parkland, Florida, and the President of the United States said, "This guy's pure evil," well, you're not even trying. That's just lazy. You're not getting underneath this. And this is why we never get anywhere near solution. Because demonizing is the opposite of God. God does not share in the demonizing in which we all engage. A homie sent me an email the other day. He says, God doesn't look at me and he doesn't see sin. He sees son. I go, exactly. God doesn't have enemies. And we ought not to have them either. God shuns nobody ever. These are key things. But people of faith can kind of be condescending to God. Oh, we think you're great. We're going to go like this, and we think you're just wonderful. Could you stand over here a second? Because we got to go execute some bad guys. Seriously. That's how we are. But nobody with a lick of sense thinks that God is aligned with that. Nobody. You know, everybody knows. God does not share in that point of view. Does not. And yet, we like you, you're just not that realistic. These are people who are going like this. And that's a problem. That's why it's absolutely essential. It will change exactly how we operate and think if we can align ourselves with spaciousness and expansive mercy. Otherwise, we just settle for a puny, tiny, partial God. This is sort of on my mind lately, so I'm sorry. Anybody else? Yes.
I wondered what influenced you to become a Jesuit over other orders in the Catholic Church, and how does Jesuit spirituality influence homeboy industry?
Thank you. I think you had a good, clear voice. I think everybody heard that. I was educated by the Jesuits, so that was kind of important, and it was during the Vietnam War, so somebody like Daniel Berrigan, who died not that long ago, he was one of the reasons why I became a Jesuit. I remember going to the Mark Taper Forum, a play written by him called The Trial of the Catonsville Nine. And I think it's 50 years since that happened. And he was a Jesuit, so when I was taught by them, they were prophetic and hilarious, and I love the combo burger of prophetic and hilarious. And and I remember watching that play. Two things, odd things, was watching that play and reading Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. Go figure. And I said, I want to cast my lot with these guys. They would take us to, war protests, huge things. You could never do this now in a million years. Permission slips, what are you talking about? Cell phones, you didn't have anything. I stuck my head in the door. Yeah, we're driving up to San Francisco from LA, a big protest. Okay, have a good time. That's the way it was. And we drove up there for the day, marched in the largest war protest during the Vietnam War, and we drove home. Crazy, 6 hours, 12 hours. So I wanted to, the other thing was joy. They're absolutely joyful. So in terms of spirituality, there are two spiritualities that kind of fill our place. And one is Ignatian Spirituality. And the other one is the spirituality of the L'Arche communities. Jean Vanier, I recommend that you read them. Very simple, very holy. They're a little over 50 years old. And he started these communities for disabled and whatever the word is, And rather than have them languish in some mental institution, they put them in communities. And the people who accompany them aren't staff and workers. No, it's family, it's all community. So there's a lot. And Jean Vanier says that the highest form of spirituality is tenderness. So at Homeboy, we say if love is the answer, community is the context, but tenderness is the methodology. I would say that the incarnation happened because God needed to make his love tender, that Jesus is the tenderness of God. And that if love doesn't become tender, it stays in the ether or in the air or in your head or even in your heart. But unless it becomes tender, there's no connective tissue. And it's all about relational wholeness. How do we connect to each other? So that's kind of the spirituality. Homie, maybe I'll end with this. Miguel Lugo, he said to me the other day, the homeboy way is the opposite of things, which I like. Because it's kind of, homeboy wants to announce a message. What if we were to invest in folks at the margins rather than incarcerate our way out of our problems? And Homeboy wants to be what the world is ultimately invited to become, which is a community of connection and exquisite mutuality and kinship. Miguel spent 25 years in prison and a juvenile tried as an adult. A chunk of that time was in solitary confinement in the SHU. And he's one of those guys, proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. So I'm sitting in my office, and my office is all glass, and I can look out into, from my vantage point behind my desk, I can see the whole reception area by design. Who's that just walked in? Who are those 4 guys? I'll call somebody in. Bring those guys into my office right now, because we're going to have trouble, because I can tell they're not going to play well with others. That kind of thing. So I have 4 potential donors sitting in front of my desk, and I'm talking to them. And when I see this guy walk in, now the reception area is packed, and there's a kind of what we call the well, a bunch of homies inside. Hi, welcome to Homeboy. Why don't you sign in? How can I help you? That kind of thing. And I see this guy comes in, and he's a gang member, but I don't know who he is. And he has a soda can, and he's punctuating every sentence with the soda can. So every exclamation point, every period every comma is leaping out of the soda can onto the well, and the homies are there. I can tell they're getting uncomfortable. So I know we have a combo burger of meth and madness. So I go, I'm going to have to interrupt this conversation with these potential donors. So I start to get up when Miguel arrives, and he's one of the biggest vatos who's ever worked there. He's got a big shirt, big chest. It says security on the back. And so I see him put his arm around this guy, and he walks him outside. And he tells me about it later. And the guy, when he's outside, the guy lifts his shirt to reveal that there's a gun tucked into the front of his pants. And then he lets his shirt drop. And Miguel looks at him and says, how about you and me, we walk down to Olvera Street, and I'll buy you some tacos. And the guy lifts his shirt again, and he says, how about I put a bullet in your head? And he lets his shirt drop. And Miguel looks at him and says, 2 tacos or 3? And the guy agrees to walk down Alameda to Placita. And Miguel tells me that the guy isn't having a conversation with the voices in his head. The voices are leaping out of his mouth. So they're walking down the street, and the guy says, shoot his ass. No, he's okay. You can't trust him. He's buying me tacos. Like that all the way down Alameda Street. And Miguel gets to Olvera Street, and he buys a plate of 3 tacos, and he gives it to the guy. And the guy takes 1 taco, and he throws it to the ground, no doubt feeding one of those voices in his head. And he just inhales the other 2 tacos because he's a ravenously hungry guy. And Miguel is proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness. And so the trick is to receive the tender glance of God so that you can choose to be that tender glance in the world. So that we are empowered to look at each other and say, you're here. Thank you all very much.